If you clicked on this video, you're probably not 100% spare shooter, and not many of us are, but at the highest level, pros are in the 90s to 95, even 100s for some events. You might miss one or two here or there. As far as everything goes when it comes to your physical game, that's amazing. That'll help you become a better bowler, but once you get past that, you'll hit a plateau if you're not able to consistently pick up your spares and have a system that will allow you to not really have to think about it when you do leave a spare. We're gonna go through all the things that I do for my spare game that a lot of the highest level pros use. Now, you don't have to use a spare ball. This is the system I'm about to show you where almost every spare you're going to use a spare ball. Now, this is something that happens more at the professional level, but to start off, sometimes you might learn how to hook it at spares. We all did that, I learned that, but this is a more advanced level of shooting spares. I truly believe that once you're able to learn how to shoot spares with your spare ball, it just opens up a wide range of possibilities of it's easier to shoot other spares that you leave throughout each game as you're bowling. This system just takes the guesswork out of where do I stand, what do I do, because we're using the heaviest part of the oil on the lane for this system. So let's get into it. When you're bowling on a house shot, there's so much more volume in the middle part of the lane. So that just means there's way more oil on 20, which is the middle dot and arrow. And on a sport shot, same thing. There's more oil in that spot. Now it might move around a little bit quicker, obviously, because there's not as much volume, but in general, you're gonna use the middle part of the lane to shoot your spares with this system. And that's just because when you're using a plastic ball, which is important for this, it's because it's meant to go straight. It's meant to go straight in the oil, so that way the ball doesn't move. So when we're shooting spares, we're using 20, the middle arrow, as our focal point. Now, depending on what eye is more dominant for you, we might not be hitting 20, but it's giving you an idea of where we want the ball. So you want the ball to be in the middle part of the lane when shooting across lane at these spares. I'm going to be showing you how to go through a cycle, which is just gonna give you the general idea of an area of spares that you're shooting. Now, I really believe in this because once you learn how to shoot one area of spares, so when we work on like the 10 pin, yes, you can do low ball, which is where you just hit the 10 or the 7 pin off the corner pins, but this system is gonna be better overall for you to have an area for multiple different spares. So like I said, it takes the guesswork out of where you're actually standing and shooting and knowing that you can make multiple spares in that quadrant. We'll go over that a little bit later in the video, but for now, I'm just gonna show you where we're gonna stand for a 10 pin. So when I'm standing to hit a 10 pin, I'm gonna stand on 30. So when we're standing on 30, we're lining up with the inside of your foot. So as you can see, the inside of my foot is on 30. So from here, I know I can shoot the 6 pin, the 6-10, the 6-9-10, anything in that quadrant, I will be able to hit. And now, the point of this, I'm not trying to hit the 3 pin. You don't wanna hit the 3 pin because when I'm shooting at this, if you hit the 3 pin, you're not making the 10 pin. So again, we're using this alignment to shoot all those spares. So I'm standing on 30, and again, I'm trying to use 20 as my focal point going across lane. And as you can see, my feet are gonna be a little bit angled. It's gonna be a little bit different for everyone, but I do have wider hips, so my feet are gonna be angled so that way I can get my hips open. And then the next part of this is you make sure that your alignment is the same with your foot to your shoulder. So as you can see, if I'm here, I'm not going across lane. Now, if you look at my hips, to get my hips going that way, I gotta open my hips and my shoulder to go to that angle. I promise you, if you do this drill and you're consistently hitting the 3 pin, you are missing the 10 pin. So if you're doing that and hitting the 3 pin while doing this drill, you're only hurting yourself because that's not the point of this. We're trying to pick up a 10 pin, be able to shoot our corner pin spares. So again, when we talk about the pin in front of our focal pin, you don't want to be hitting it. Even if you're clipping it a little bit, you'll be surprised, especially if there's not as much oil in the middle part of the lane. As the lanes start to break down, the ball will start to hook a little bit more towards the end of your break point and it will miss the spare. So don't cheat yourself when you're doing this. So next one, I'm shooting across lane. This one is really hard. I will say, I'm not gonna sit here and lie to you. It is a lot harder when you first learn it, but once you get it down, it'll be way easier to pick up your corner pin spares going across lane. So again, with a spare ball, you're gonna stand to the dot right or left of the middle arrow, which is gonna be 15 on the right side. And again, how we work for the 10 pin, trying to get our hips open, now we have to close them down. So now my foot is gonna come up a little bit, so that way as I'm trying to go across lane, like I said, this is a little bit harder at first because it's gonna feel really weird. As you can see, you move up, my hips now are going from this way, which would be going up the lane, to across my body. And as I'm going, I have to make sure I constantly keep it going towards my target. So I'm gonna make sure that as I'm walking, I still kind of walk towards it. You probably will drift a little bit more doing this, but that's fine. You wanna just still make sure you're walking towards your target, which is across your body. And again, we're still using that middle arrow. Now, that's a perfect example. I did pick up the 7-pin, but I did not hit the 4-7. So that is a perfect example of something that I am not gonna take as and be okay with, because I would not have picked up the 4-7. When you're using this alignment to go cross lane, you're trying to hit the 4-7, the 4-pin by itself, the 7-pin by itself, and then if you were to leave the 4-7-8. So again, don't cheat yourself. You don't wanna hit the 2-pin when you're doing this, and the opposite if you're a left-hander. So again, making sure my hips stay this way. That was better. So here's the difference between those two shots. When you are trying to shoot a cross lane, like I said, it's gonna feel very weird. It's not something naturally that your body wants to do. So that first shot, I helped a little bit with my elbow instead of trusting my alignment. Alignment where your feet are angled, your hips are in the target zone, going towards your actual focal point, is the most important part. So don't try to turn your shoulder or anything when you're doing that. And this is, like I said, shooting a cross lane is gonna take a little bit more time to get used to that, because it's gonna feel totally unnatural. But like I said, once you get this, you'll be amazed at how much easier it is to shoot a cross lane, and make sure that you don't miss spares when the lanes are transitioning. So the next spare that we're gonna try to hit is the 3-pin, the 3-6 as our focal pins. So we're trying to hit anything that's in the 3-6-10. If I leave a 3-6, if I leave a 3-pin, that's what we're trying to hit. So we should be able to pick those up. I also do use this alignment to shoot my 9-pins with my spare ball. It also does depend on what I'm bowling on. That's gonna change a little bit. We can go over that a little bit later in the video, depending on the pattern you're bowling on, but this is gonna be the basis of what you're doing to hit everything in that range. We're standing on 30 for our 4-7 combination 7-pin quadrant. Now we're gonna move 3 boards to the right to shoot the 3-6-10 area. So again, lining up with the inside of my left foot, my hips aren't going to be as open as when I was shooting the 6-10, but still open, but not as much, because I don't want to create as much angle as I did, but still have a little bit of angle. So instead of being like this, I typically just have my foot back a little bit, but just a little less. And then I still use my hips to create that angle. Again, we don't want to hit the head pin. That is picture perfect. Now when we're shooting in this quadrant, especially at a full rack, we do want to be mindful if we do miss the head pin, but we're really heavy on the 3-pin. We've all seen that where you chop the 3-6 around the 10-pin, so you only get the 3-6 out of the 3-6-10, or even where you can chop the 3-pin. So just be mindful that even if you don't hit the head pin, really watch where the 6-pin goes. If the 6-pin kind of lightly taps around the 10-pin, you could be running that risk of where if you accept that as shooting it properly, you could run the risk of chopping it more often. So like I said, that was picture perfect where you're really hitting the 3-6 very evenly between them. All right, you guessed it. We're gonna shoot a cross lane, and we're gonna be using the 2-4 as our focal point for this next pair. So we're working in 3s, the same thing as if you probably learned how to hook at your spares. You always worked in 3s. Now we move towards the spare. We're also moving towards the spare going the opposite way. So I was standing on 15. Now I'm gonna be moving 3 boards to the left, 3 boards to the right if you're left-handed. And same thing, I'm not gonna be as angled because the pin is closer to the head pin, so I'm gonna bring my foot back just a little bit more. Don't try to help it. Know that you lined up properly and let your arm follow through. Perfect. Again, right there, you want to hit very heavy between the 2 and the 4. If you are closer to the head pin, you run the risk of chopping the 2-4 off the 7-pin. So again, it's all what you get out of it with spares. I always tell any of my students or any clients that I've worked with that your spare practice is what you get out of it. If you accept something that's a questionable thing, don't accept okay when you're practicing spares, because okay turns into I miss 2 spares every single game in a tournament. Promise you, I've done it to myself when I've shot spares. I feel like I'm confident, but then I go in there and I'm not accepting. I really smacked the 3-pin in the face. I really smacked the 2-4 in the face. You really have to be accountable when you're focusing and learning how to shoot spares and knowing what you can actually see is in front of you and whether you think or not it made it. So if you're thinking you didn't make it, you probably aren't gonna make it 9 times out of 10 when you really need to make it in league or in a tournament. The last one in this spare cycle is shooting a washout, which is the opposite pocket, so the Brooklyn shot. I'm going to show you a couple different ways to shoot it that I have learned over the years. I'm going to first show you the one that I use currently, but there's not one way to shoot it. Everyone's a little bit different. This way does work the best for me. And again, it does depend on what you're bowling on. Sometimes I will change it up a little bit depending on the pattern I'm bowling on, especially on tour. But this is the one I use most often, and I think it's the most successful. Again, because you're in the part of the lane that has the most oil, so I know my ball's not going to hook. So for this one's going to seem very weird, but I am standing on 20 and looking at 20. And again, for this one, I'm pretty straightforward, and I'm going to use my hips to create that little bit of angle to get my ball going Brooklyn. And again, we're going to walk towards it. So I'm trying to hit left of the head pin, so I'm walking that way, trying to create that angle. There we go. Perfect. Again, you're probably sitting here like, holy crap, that doesn't make sense. Everyone's eyes might have to be a little bit different. When you're shooting that spare, your eyes might need to be a little bit further left, or your eyes might need to be a little bit further right than what I'm saying. We're using 20, the middle arrow, to really have an idea of where the general direction of the ball is going. So this is another way you can shoot the washout, and I have seen it done, and I have used this sometimes, whereas you move really far left or right if you're left-handed. So you move kind of like you're shooting a 10 pin, but again, it's all about the angle you create, where I wouldn't open my hips as much. So I'd probably be on the last dot, and instead of really opening my hips, I'm going to be as if I was like shooting the washout if I was standing on 20, and I'm going to be trying to shoot pretty straight up the lane. Again, your shoulder and hip to where your foot is the most important when you're creating this angle. What I have noticed is I'll see the head pin wrap around the 10 pin more, because there's just not, it's like almost too much angle. You run the risk that once you get out here, even if you're bowling on a long pattern, it might skid way more, so it's going to go towards the 3 pin, versus if you're in the middle part of the lane, you know that there is oil there. It's a little bit more tricky when you're here, because you don't really know, unless you're on the opposite side of the lane, what's truly going on in that part of the lane. I'm going to tell you guys a little secret. The biggest thing to shooting a washout, trying to get the head pin to hit the 10 pin, is you have to have a tiny little bit of rotation. When I'm shooting most of my spares, I really try to be dead up the back, really flat, very straight. You still want that somewhat concept when you're shooting the washout, but you want a tiny bit where your thumb comes around the ball, because in order to get the washout, I'm sure you guys have seen this, you've seen the head pin wrap around the 10 pin. Now, sometimes you'll get lucky and it'll just go straight to the 10 pin, but in some cases, if you have a little rotation, it'll hit off the sidewall and hit the 10 pin. You've seen people pick up the washout where it's like a late delayed and it hits it. That's why. So you will have a little bit more success where you have extra variance where you can pick it up if you have that little bit of rotation. I know this can seem a little bit intimidating, but as I said, when I first learned this, I was also kind of struggling to get everything down. But once you learn what your body can adjust to and where you need to be with your hips aligning with your shoulders, and how much you need to actually open up your feet to your hips, again, remember, that's going to depend on what your body looks like. You know, your hips, your shoulders, how wide your shoulders are compared to your hips. All of that is going to make a huge difference in how you shoot your spares. So this system, it is a good starting point, but it will be adjusted a little bit to your own game. And so you have to really pay attention to where your ball is going. So if you're consistently missing it to the right or to the left, that just means you have to open your body or close your body a little bit more. And you always want to do the opposite of what's happening. So if you're missing it to the right, you want to close a little bit to the left. And if you're missing it to the left, you need to open up a little bit. So again, you have to kind of play with what you are seeing and what your inconsistencies are as you're shooting these spares. Another thing to note, and we're getting a little bit more advanced, is that as you're bowling on patterns or even in a house shot, depending on what house shot you might bowl on, whether there's more oil or less oil, this is not a definite where you have to stand here. I've definitely been in tournaments or come into a tournament where I naturally see, like if I'm bowling on a short pattern, my ball's already hooking at 20, I will adjust. My starting point would be 32 with my feet instead of 30, but then you're still doing the same adjustments where you're moving right and left off of it the same way, 3 boards, but your first starting point might be a little bit different. Again, that just depends on what you're bowling on, what you're seeing, what your misses are. If you're in a tournament and then you just start to miss 10 pins, you might have had a great day, and then you miss a 10 pin. First, you obviously have to make sure, did you throw it good? And then the second part of it is, am I consistently missing it because my ball is hooking now or skidding too much? So you might have to have like on-lane adjustments when it comes to this, but this is a good starting point. If you guys have any questions, me and Nate are here. You can email us at nateandeleasebowling@gmail.com. We do lessons. I would love to go over this with you. I know a lot of people, this is a big thing where just shooting spares, it's simple, but you don't know where to start. So again, I hope you guys like this one, and we'll see you on the next video.